would like to start with today's debate. The topic for today's debate is Judiciary is the last bastion of hope for Indian democracy. We have two teams with us, one for the motion, having Arshia and Prakhar, and one against the motion, Parth and Ashwin. So one huge round of applause for the participants. So I now invite Team A to put forward their opening remarks.
Quoting Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States of America. All the rights secured to the citizens under the Constitution are worth nothing, a mere bubble except guaranteed to them by an independent and virtuous judiciary. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we as a team stand here before this August gathering arguing for the motion on the topic, Judiciary is the last bastion of hope for Indian democracy. The only form of government that maximizes people's participation and happiness, gives them control while keeping them in control, is democracy. It's a government for the people, by the people, and of the people. But who exactly are these people? A very shallow answer to this would be the majority of the nation, and here is why. A democracy cannot be compared to a mobocracy. Because there is a common consensus, a majority decision, and only a dissenting opinion of a person who's on the other side of the mob. Rule of majority can't exactly be termed as democracy. It's an explanation that could be dangerous, in fact lethal, to the very ideas, ethos, and values that democracy enshrines. Democracy means rule of the people, rule of the majority while protecting the rights and freedom of the minority. Ladies and gentlemen, our elected leaders and legislators, in their attempt to appease the majority of this nation and acquire votes, may ruthlessly obliterate the rights of those who are not in favor of them. This proposition, I might repeat, is not always true, but has time and again come up in the history of Indian politics, or I should say, the dark history of Indian politics. Appeasement of one and discrimination against the other is one allegation that is common across all party lines, all governments, whether central or state. Being politically motivated for a political party cannot be termed as moral, but it certainly can't be termed as moral. But what can we do of such acts that cannot be termed as moral or immoral? Acts that are against the principles of democracy enshrined in the Constitution, acts which can violate the freedom of individuals. To mitigate the consequences of such acts, we need a body that derives its functions and power from the Constitution. A body that consists of learned members who can keep in check the elected members of this nation. This body, ladies and gentlemen, is the Judiciary of India.
Judiciary of India. As rightly pointed out in an argument, there is a probability, a possibility that elected leaders and legislators might pass such an act, which might undermine the democracy which they solemnly swear to serve. And if these leaders in their actions try to intentionally or unintentionally undermine these ideals and principles, there is a need for a body that safeguards these values and principles, and also an authority to remind these leaders to adhere to these values. Judiciary is capable and empowered enough by the Constitution to carry out both these functions. Since independence, whenever there has been a case where those who intended to serve the democracy started to disintegrate it, judiciary has promptly taken cognizance and acted to protect the citizens of the nation. Whether it was the case of Keswananda Bharti or the MJAC, actions of one party or the another, the blindfolded lady of justice never discriminates between two individuals. The judiciary, as mentioned before, therefore doesn't derive its power from the majority, and hence appeasements of any kind is a bleak possibility. At the end of the day, it is to be realized that judiciary is the only body that is empowered to carry out the function of justice to its citizens, and it is the only body that forever remains neutral and does not get influenced by any political ideology. And ladies and gentlemen, therefore, I stress on its integral and indispensable role in the overall functioning of the Indian democracy, and lay my concluding argument of it being the last mission of hope for the Indian democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Team A, for making such a strong case. I now invite Team B, which is going against the motion, to put forward their opening remarks.
A very good morning to one and all. I am Parth and I'm here to proudly throw my hammer on this motion. As they rightly said, democracy is of the people, by the people, for the people. Any body that is going to spearhead the revival of democracy needs to first of all be an appealing force to the masses, and it should at least reflect on the cross section of the population. That is the bare minimum. A country like India, with its diverse cultures and social groups, needs to have inclusive organs of government. But that isn't the case. While the legislature and executive are equally guilty, does it merit a body that is considered as the last bastion of hope to afford to be such an exclusive body of elites? Let us look at some data. From 2018 to 2022, 537 judges were appointed to various high courts. Of them, 79% were from the general category, 11% from OBCs, and 2.6% from the minorities. SCs and STs were merely 2.8 and 1.3% respectively. Until 1988, we did not have a single Dalit judge in the Supreme Court. From 1950 to date, there have been only 5 judges in the Supreme Court from the scheduled caste and only 1 from the scheduled tribe. These jarring data show the continuing exclusivity of the judiciary and its limitation to certain strata of society. The issue with women's representation is even worse. A paltry 8% of the High Court judges are women. This is an alarming figure. It is very disheartening to admit that in the history of independent India, there has been not a single woman who has become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Therefore, an institution which itself is so highly flawed, an institution which in many ways is so inaccessible, and an institution which has so much scope for improvement, can it be the last bastion of hope for our democracy? With this, I am more than happy to hand over the stage to my very dear and eloquent friend Ashwin. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Adding to what my learned friend Parth has said, I would like to continue to present a case on how the judiciary is not the last bastion of hope for our democracy. Judiciary is not the stand-alone pillar of our democracy, but rather coexist with the legislature and executive wings of the government. The system, as the makers of our constitution had envisaged, is a system of checks and balances with every wing entrusted with its own role and noble duties. Construing the judiciary as the last and final bastion of hope kind of gets into this idea, and hence is often an understatement to the contributions made by the legislative and executive wings of the government. We all have differing opinions on the past and present governments, but let us all admit to one thing. If our country is sailing forward from an impoverished economy to a formidable force, it is because of the legislative and executive branches of the government. Secondly, as my friend had rightly pointed out, the higher echelons of judiciary is still an inaccessible branch to the majority of this country. What are the factors? Litigation cost. Who can afford litigation in this country? Look at the judges. Look at the panel of judges. How many of them have been from the marginalized caste? The influence of judiciary, the higher echelons of judiciary, particularly at the grassroots level, is negligible. It is the legislative and executive branch that has a deeper connection with the people, and the assumption that a body that is alienated from the vast majority and is all troubled with its own issues, including pending cases, can be the torch bearer for our democracy is thoughtless. This leads us to the fundamental question. If not for judiciary, who else? It is the people. It is us who are going to be the torch bearers and revival for our democracy. It is the same people who wait in the scorching sun to cast their ballot. It is the same people who are vocal about injustice. Yes, they are going to spearhead this movement for the revival of our democracy. As long as we don't trust our own citizens, let me reiterate, if we don't place trust on our own citizens, we as a nation cannot go forward. With this, I conclude. And I'm putting an end to my arguments, but certainly not to my thoughts. Thank you. Jai Hind.
So that was a great point and opening made by Team B. Now moving to the second segment of debate, which is the rebuttal and sur-rebuttal round. So I now invite Team A for rebuttals.
As pointed out by dear friend, that the force of the masses is required in a democracy because it's for the people, by the people. But as said earlier in my opening remarks as well, masses do constitute mobs as well. Take an example of a lynch mob. Masses sometimes may or may not, in their emotions, take decisions that do not enshrine the values and goals of democracy. At this level, we need someone with a moral standings on a moral high ground, such as the judiciary, which can remind our leaders of that mob and the mob itself, of what the rules and regulations of this nation are, what the values and what are the values and what are the cores of this Indian democracy. Force of the masses cannot always be trusted. Force of the masses was also present during Nazi Germany. Does that make it correct? Force of the masses is a very, very dangerous thing. The second point that was pointed out was the exclusivity of judiciary and how there's almost negligible participation of certain communities. Well, to count, it's not something that has been limited to the judiciary itself. It's something which is a very wide phenomenon seen in this country, and nobody is denying it. But efforts are being made to counter it. Reservations are being made. Seats are being protected. There have been provisions that encourage them to lead into this fair. Whether it is the case of women reservation or caste-based reservations, I believe that judiciary in all manners is working towards making itself a place that is inclusive of all. The data shared by our dear friends is of years that have been is of the years which are very the data shared is very old, I must say. There have been improvements that I've seen. The reservation policy has included now 7% to 9% of people belonging to the scheduled caste and population. So I believe improvements are being made. It's a slow process, but it will take time.
Raising the point of inaccessibility, my learned friend in the other team fails to realize that legislature and executive are even more inaccessible. Even today, when there is a dispute, one party tells the another that I'll see you in the court. This displays the trust Indian masses have on the judiciary, and it is obviously not baseless. Time and again, judiciary has taken suo motu cognizance of various issues. Even during the pandemic, judiciary worked for the overall welfare of the Indian citizens. This shows the judiciary is independent, and judiciary is indeed the last bastion of hope for the Indian democracy.
So I would like to start. The learned opposition talked about the need of having a body which will have a counter-majoritarian effect. A body which will stop the oppressive or suppressive actions of the legislature and the executive. And we completely agree that there is the need of such a body. But can the judiciary really be that body? Has the judiciary really been that body? Let's take some examples. During the emergency, when people's rights were being snatched away, it was the people's movements which stood for their rights. It was the people's movements that ensured that oppressive and suppressive actions were protested against. Very recently, let's take the instance of the farmers' protest. When the farmers claimed that they weren't taken into account, their concerns weren't taken into consideration, it was again the masses and it was the people's movements who stood in opposition to the government, and it was the people who ultimately forced the government to hear them. It was not the judiciary which made the government hear them. So, and as far as the point of there goes about taking suo motu cognizance, we've seen that it has been very few and far cases of suo motu cognizance being taken. There are so many multiple cases where the court has simply not heard important constitutional matters. The court has simply not heard matters of people's rights, whether it be whatever your opinion be on the Article 3 abrogation of Article 370. The court has not even heard the matter sufficiently and adequately up till very recently. So I would again like to proudly oppose this motion. Thank you.
I would like to counter some of the points made from my learned friend in the government side. See, my friend have been vocal about how the blind lady does not discriminate. I do agree the blind lady should not discriminate, but is that really happening? I don't really think so. Let me remind you of the very famous Mathura case judgment, that is Tukaram versus Maharashtra, in which learned professors from Law University, including Upendra Bakshi, had to write a letter to the Chief Justice. What did the judiciary say at that point? That a lady, a tribal woman of 16 years who was raped, gave consent because she did not protest. Our judiciary, we have to understand, my dear friend, is not an independent body. It is a sum total of our morality. It is a sum total of political idealism. It is not an independent body that is going to spearhead the revival of our democracy. It cannot be. As it exists, it is doing a fantastic job. Fine, good. But when you say that it is the last bastion, when you are putting it at a higher pedestal than other things, then I have a problem. Because I don't think that it has that superiority to be construed as that particular way. Also, I would just like to point out how the point of exclusivity has just been backed out. It was the President of India in 1996, Sri K.R. Narayanan, who had pointed out that judiciary, K.R. Narayanan, who himself was from the marginalized caste, who himself had pointed out that there is exclusivity in the procedures for judicial appointments. It's a public discourse. You can check that out. And at that point, then accepted. Very few judges from the marginalized caste have reached to that point. And when was the first time a woman became became a judge in the Supreme Court? Fatima Bibi in the 1990s. It took 40 years for our judiciary to accept that change. Executive, and look at the legislative branches. Legislative brought in 33% reservation for women. See, I'm not trying to say that the judiciary is bad, but we have to understand, putting judiciary at a higher pedestal than the other branches, that is not going to help, because judiciary is a sum total of our own moralities. Okay. And another thing which I would like to point out, my learned friend had said that judiciary had helped during the pandemics. I would really appreciate if my learned friend could throw some light on how judiciary had helped people during pandemic, because as far as I know, it was the executive who had been working tirelessly and the legislative who had been working to distribute kits. And as far as I know, the all mandate about vaccines and everything was covered entirely by those wings of the government. So I would just like to hear from my learned friend on that ideal. Thank you.
So those were some great points put forward by Team A and Team B.
Thank you.
So the chief guest is almost here. So we will now move on with the next program, where he would be presenting a presentation in front of us.
New India debates at the very prestigious National Law University, Delhi. Thank you so much, New India Junction, for giving me this opportunity to come here and spend time with all of you. I'm sure the subject for the debate, as well as the arguments advanced by our young debaters, must have truly caught all of your imagination, and I sincerely hope that the best team will win, and we are all looking forward to the results. The subject for us to discuss today, and I'll try to go through the presentation as quickly as possible with all of you, is the journey the country has made over the last 9 years from being a fragile 5 economy to the fastest growing major economy in the world, where we figure among the top 5 economies. 2014, this might startle all of you. About 50% of the country's population did not have access to a bank account. Now, what does this mean in real terms? That about 50% of the country's economy was not part of the formal banking system, formal economy, even 75 years after independence, which meant that about 50% of the country's population did not have access to as simple and mandatory financial products like an insurance. There was no concept of savings in a formal way using a banking system. And when you are not part of the formal banking economy, it doesn't matter if the country's economy is growing at 13%, 12%, 10%, it just doesn't matter, because you're not part of the formal economy at all. The very first thing that the government did was to start enrolling people into the banking system. And friends, I want you to appreciate this particular dimension of governance. In less than 2 years, about 50 crore people got bank account for the first time. And how did 50 crore people get bank account for the first time? Because we leveraged technology. There was eKYC. People could register and produce their eKYC credentials easier. And around the world, this became the model, this became the story of financial inclusion of the largest number of people in the shortest period of time. Now, how did this impact the poor? Let me give you a small example. Because somebody had access to a bank account, somebody got a insurance product. This happened in my office during COVID. There was a old man who came to my office and said that his young son, who was just 38, 39, passed away due to COVID. But he came to thank us. I was surprised. I thought, he would be asking for some financial help. But here he was saying that, sir, I had come down to your office a few years ago. We had taken a 12 rupee life insurance. And that got happened because we had a Jandan account. And now, right after my son died, the family got 2 lakh rupees as life insurance. Friends, imagine for a minute, 50% of the country's population did not have access to bank accounts 70 years after independence. So the things that we take for granted like medical insurance, life insurance, products of this kind, they were absolutely not available to the largest size of the country's population. Now, how is this going to impact you and me? Now, because a large number of people got access to bank accounts, a large number of people started saving, a large number of companies started providing insurance products, because delivery of services could be made directly without leakage to these people. The weakest and the lowest in the economic strata got social security and strengthened. And as a result of that, 13.5 crore people have come out of poverty. And this, mind you, is the largest number of people lifted out of poverty by a democratic country in the shortest period of time in human history. And how is this going to impact you and I? Now, when 13.5 crore people are coming out of poverty and their purchasing power increases, what are they going to do? Instead of buying 1 pair of shoes, they will now buy 2 pairs. Instead of buying 1 pair of new set of clothes, 1 set of clothes for say Deepavali, they will buy 2 pairs of clothes, 3 pairs of clothes for another occasion. That is going to increase demand in the system. They were going to purchase these things from the local small shop. It's going to create employment and more demand in the system. That is going to transform into factories producing more. And they will need more services. They will need software engineers who will need to write software for it. They will get into contracts. They will need to import things. They will need to enforce contracts. And young lawyers like you will get more opportunities because of that. So 13.5 crore people getting out of poverty means that the entire Indian economy will see so much of buoyancy and vibrancy. And that's what leveraging digital has created. While we have used digital to transform the lives of the poorest, we have also used the power of digital to stop leakages. About 2 lakh crore rupees, which otherwise the country would have lost in transmission and delivery of direct benefits, is now saved because of the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile trinity. You all know that a few years ago, when Rajiv ji made this very impactful statement on the state of affairs of the country's economy then, country's polity then, that for every 1 rupee that is sent out of Delhi, only 15 paise reaches the last man. And compare that to the power of the Jam Trinity, where the Prime Minister sends 6,000 rupees to Indian farmers. All the 6,000 rupees reaches him. There's zero leakage. And the intended beneficiary farmer is also intimated by a message from the bank that 6,000 rupees is credited to the account. So we have not only used digital to do Garib Kalyan, we have also used to plug leakages and stop corruption in the system, and we have also used digital as an export product of the country to strengthen our foreign policy. Whether it's with Singapore, whether it's with France, whether it's with Norway, or whether it's with the African Union, India is today a global leader in exporting our digital public infrastructure to these nations. So this is the comprehensive vision in action. We spoke of how the formalization of the economy took place. Just look at the sheer size of the numbers, friends. 99% of Indians today have an identity and Aadhaar card. Through the direct benefit transfer, the government has saved 2 lakh rupees, which otherwise would have gone waste. Your money, our money, it's taxpayers' money. Just imagine how seamless and easy our transit at tolls have become. I don't know if it's a practice in the north of India, but at least in the south, those who come from the southern part of the country will relate to this. There were so many cars people would put with these big boards. आप देखें ना नेता type बड़े बड़े boards डाल के ये इस संस्था का अध्यक्ष है, इसका ये फलाना है, ढिंकाना है, सेक्रेटरी है, और टोल में कोई वेट नहीं करता था, because टोल में भाई कौन वेट करता है? Because हम नेता है, इसलिए हम टोल में नहीं वेट करेंगे. You have seen videos of fights which have become viral because people don't want to stand at toll. And मैंने तो देखा हूं बैंगलोर में कई सारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जिसका पूरा अस्तित्व सिर्फ लेटर हेड पे होता है. ठीक है, लेटर हेड के बाद में 4 लोग भी नहीं होते ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, बट उसका जो लेटर हेड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के प्रेसिडेंट होता है, he puts a big board, रेड कलर और वो सायरन के साथ सब डालकर वो घूमते रहते हैं और टोल में कभी नहीं वो खड़े होते, टोल नहीं पे करते. ये एक पैंडेमिक बन गया था पूरे देश में, दैट अब वीआईपी बनना है टोल पास करने के लिए. बट टुडे वी हैव सेव्ड अप टू 80,000 crore rupees. Take a minute to just absorb this number. 80,000 crore rupees, which otherwise we would have lost in tolls. And that is giving us power and strength to build roads at India's border areas. So this is the formalization of economy. Now I want you to look at this one number here, the ease of credit. Because you're students of law and come from a university as premier as this, I want you to look at and analyze the multiple order impacts of this one Yojana. Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana has sanctioned 25 lakh crore rupees in 43 crore loans. Now what does this mean? Take a minute to understand the impact of this. When we speak of Startup India and unleashing the entrepreneurial animal of India, we generally speak about the 99,000 registered DPIIT startups, which are working in the digital product space. While that also has an impact, the entrepreneurs that the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana has created is far more impactful at the grassroots level. Let me give you an example. Last year, 3 women belonging to a self-help group came to my office. They do not come from a very upwardly mobile social, economic or educational background. One of them had an alcoholic husband. All the three had young children, and all the three came to my office with their children. Women in the age of, say, 37, 38, this was the age, do not come from tier 1 cities. They were not from Bangalore. They all came from, say, Davangere, Chitradurga, small tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities of Karnataka. And they wanted help in getting a Mudra Yojana loan. Now, what did they want to start? These three women had come together to start a pickle making factory, a pickle making unit. And where would they run this out of? They would run this out of their own homes. And to get a Mudra Yojana, they had to come up with a business plan. So the three of them sat together, made a business plan. Imagine empowerment at the grassroots. They made a business plan. Three women coming from this background, they go and approach the bank manager, present the business plan, and they get a loan of 46-47 lakhs sanctioned. They start a business. A few months later, they hire a few other people because the business has grown. Almost a year later, they come to our office just to, along with, packets of some achar and some sweets and other products that they had made, just to give it and just to thank us because we had facilitated in the loan. Then I asked them, how are they repaying? They said that they have not missed one single repayment installment. And now they have 8 different products. 8 different products. They started with one mango pickle, and then they added, some other product. Then they started something else. Then they did, jowar roti. They did something else. They have 8 different products, and they had a new ask. And that ask was, sir, we are told that in Australia, we have a large Kannada-speaking community who likes jowar roti. So we want to export to Australia. We need your help with a export license. Can you imagine the permeation of entrepreneurship at the grassroots level of how this is truly transforming the country? And when I spoke to the banking people, the authorities of the bank, to find out more details about the Mudra Yojana, about 60% of the loans that have been given under the Mudra Yojana have been given to women. And guess what is the NPA? It's less than 3%. NPA of Mudra Yojana is less than 3%, while the biggest of corporates default. The poorest are not defaulting. They are paying on time and they are keeping the banking system alive and healthy. So 43 crore such loans have been given to the tune of 25 lakh crore rupees, and that has created crores of micro entrepreneurs at multiple levels. This is why you see 13.5 crore people who have come out of poverty. Because even if one enterprise will employ 2 people, imagine the amount of employment opportunities this has created. All of these things. The PM Swanidhi Yojana. Many of you may not be aware of this. I'll take a minute to explain to you the impact of this. You know what this PM Swanidhi Yojana is? It's giving collateral free loan to street vendors. If they want 1,000 rupees as credit to start their business in the morning and they go to a money lender, the money lender will give him 900 rupees in the morning. And he will have to return 1,100 rupees in the evening. This is how brutal access to credit in the informal system is for street vendors. मैं आपसे निवेदन करता हूं, because most of us here come from a particular social economic sector, and many times we would not be talking to these people to understand how they deal with credit. The next time you go to buy some sabzi at the sabzi wala, the cart wala, ask him how he gets access to his credit. He will tell you that there will be some money lender somewhere nearby who will give him If he takes, say, the interest is charged even before the principal, the loan is advanced, and he will have to give back the money the very same evening, and it's like 10%, 12% in a day. So we have given up to 50,000 rupees loan to these street vendors without any collateral, and about 50 lakh street vendors have gotten PM Swanidhi loan. So that's empowering the weakest. That's what the formalization of the economy has done. And there are of course questions that keep coming about employment mein kya ho raha hai, employment mein kya ho raha hai. I wouldn't even want to go to explain the impact of Mudra and such other loans. We have discussed about it, but just look at the formal employment that is created. 6.43 crore new EPFO registrations have been achieved in the last few years. 6.43 crore. It's formal people, it's young people getting into the EPFO in a formal manner. Now we have also brought in the country a system where a culture where wealth creation is respected. And as a result of that, we see schemes like Startup India, we see schemes like the PLI, and the biggest example of the success of the PLI scheme is the mobile phone in your hand. 9 years ago, we were nowhere near being an important player in manufacturing of mobile phones. Today, India is the second largest manufacturer of mobile phones in the world. It's something that we have seen. We have decriminalized corporate laws. We have rationalized our corporate tax systems. Our corporate taxation is among the lowest in the world today. We have brought in structural reforms like the GST. We have brought in important legislations like IBC. We have also amended, revised our arbitration laws. And in the coming years, as students of law, you will appreciate that India will be a very important jurisdiction for arbitration, commercial arbitration, international arbitration. We have recapitalized our banks. Just look at the quality of difference in our banks. Our banks had no money to loan. The NPA was around 14%, and today it's just 3.9%. And one point that I want all of you to remember is this: 10 lakh crore rupees of NPA is recovered in the last 9 years. And what is NPA? What would have happened if this NPA is not recovered? Where does banks get the money to donate? I mean, to loan, extend loans. It's your money, it's my money. The money that we would have invested in the bank is what the bank lends. So if 10 lakh crore rupees of loans would not be recovered, what would have happened to your money and my money? So we have not only addressed the NPA problem, we have also recapitalized the banks. And today, despite COVID, despite Ukraine-Russia war, Indian economy to a great extent had a cushioning because of the strength of our banking ecosystem. Many words like ease of doing business, startup, venture capitalists, angel funding, bootstrapping, IPO, which has now become a part of our everyday lexicon, did not simply exist a few years ago. You talk to a youngster today, he speaks of, startup, bootstrap, Series A, Series B. A few years ago, these words and terms were just not part of our vocabulary. And today, all states are competing with each other to improve their ease of doing business ranking. ये competition ही नहीं था कुछ साल पहले, but we introduced this concept and started a competition in this. We spoke about the decriminalization of criminal acts, of corporate laws. Just look at direct tax collection. It's a 121% increase from 6.3 lakh crore to 16.61 lakh crore. GST collection is at 18.10 lakh crore in 22-23. The same country, the same set of rules, the same set of legislation, the same set of officers, change in political leadership, and the country's tax revenues have tripled. There's so much more additional money. Now, what is the government doing with all this additional money? Now, all of this additional money is now being used to create infrastructure in this country. Now, what is this infrastructure doing? Why do we need this infrastructure? Many of you who would have visited any country abroad would realize that the difference between, say, the first world countries and India was in the quality of the infrastructure. But in the last so many years, the pace at which we are building highways has tripled. We have built more highways in the last 8-10 years than what previous governments built in 70 years. We have built more airports in the last 7 years than what governments have built in the last 70 years. We have built more medical colleges in the last 9 years than what the country's governments built over the last 70 years. There is a 3-time increase in the number of medical seats, UG and PG. We have built more universities, airports, ports, and just in Delhi you see metro connectivity increasing. So now what is this much of investment in infrastructure going to do? The more money you put in infrastructure creation, it not only creates jobs today, but it also creates jobs of tomorrow, because it triggers a virtuous economic cycle. Because a highway comes, the land prices increase, new investments come, this petrol stations that will come, there will be hotels that will come, there will be some parks that will come, and economic activity increases. So this is the thrust the country's infrastructure development took place. Just look at the numbers here. Pace of highways have increased 2.4 times. 12,500 kilometers under Bharatmala Yojana is completed. The number of airports have doubled. Rural roads, jiske baat humne kiye, is at 91 kilometers per day. 10 lakh crore rupees is invested in capital expenditure just in 23-24. 725 metric ton capacity is added in our ports. So this is the amount of infrastructure development that has taken place. Now look at this picture of the Kargil-Zanskar road. And I'm sure if many of you would have taken a trip to Ladakh or done a bike ride these days, recently you would have noticed that whether it's in Arunachal, whether it's in Uttarakhand, or whether it's in Ladakh, the amount of road building activity that is happening is unprecedented. Now, why is this important? Just take a minute to appreciate why building border infrastructure is so important. I don't know how many of you have seen this clip that was viral in social media a few days ago during the parliament session. The earlier defense minister, A.K. Antony, made a speech in the parliament. He was asked by the opposition then as to why we are not building infrastructure in the border areas, especially in the border that is touching China. The defense minister goes on record on the floor of the parliament and says that it's a strategy of the government that we don't want to build roads. And he explains the logic behind it. He says we don't want to build roads because if we build good border infrastructure, the enemy will come inside. So the long-standing policy of the government is not to build border infrastructure. I mean, as hilarious and as incredible as it sounds, this was the official policy of the previous governments. As a result of that, we saw zero improvement in India's infrastructure, physical infrastructure in the border areas. And imagine a defense minister of the country making a statement of this nature on the floor of the house. But today, whether it is Kargil or whether it is Arunachal, whether it's Uttarakhand or whether it is Himachal, there is unbelievable and unprecedented development of border infrastructure, because we realize that when we build and strengthen a border infrastructure at the border, not only are we strengthening our national security internally, but we are also in a better position to deal with adversaries in an external and foreign policy manner. And that is where the money is spent, the infrastructure creation. We discussed of how the exports have increased. Look at just two numbers here. The PLI scheme in 14 sectors has resulted in incremental sales of 6.75 lakh crore, which has now registered in highest annual exports of 447 billion US dollars. Highest ever registered by India. Because we have a PLI scheme, we are incentivizing manufacturing, we are giving impetus to defense manufacturing in India, 14 sectors PLI, EV, all of these things. 98% of all mobile phone shipments from India were locally made. India has now become the third largest automobile market. 23x times increase in defense exports. We are now exporting electrical equipment and machinery 3 times more than what we did in 2014. Just look at these. In toys, there's an increase. In marine exports, there's an increase. Electronic goods, there's an increase. While doing all of this, the country's government has also focused on the cultural revival of this country. Look at the Somnath temple that was desecrated multiple times by invaders. Now the government has rebuilt the Somnath temple and restored its glory. 500 years there was a festering wound which led to so much of division and acrimony. The Ram Mandir, which was not constructed for 500 years, which was a long-standing demand of justice. 500 years the problem was left festering, it's addressed, and we have moved on. So is the case with Kashi Vishwanath. So is the case with multiple other projects at restoring the cultural glory of the country. 300 plus stolen artifacts have been brought back to India. There's a decolonization attempt even at our emblems and insignia of the Navy, the Air Force. Truly transform the cultural space of the country. And while doing all of this, we have also recognized that women-led development is extremely crucial. And now, I just want you to look at this one slide which gives you an idea of how the policies have addressed the women development in the most comprehensive manner. It's a 360-degree attempt. The whole life cycle of the woman, from the daughter to empowering her to be a leader in her workplace, to motherhood care, to boosting entrepreneurial abilities of women, all of this is done. This will fill you with a lot of pride that of the 99,000 DPIIT startups, at least 46% of startups have 1 or 2 women co-founders or women directors. It's an indication of how aspirational our women are today and how the country is witnessing literally a women-led development. And the icing on the cake is the 33% political reservation that the Prime Minister gave very recently in India's Parliament and Assembly. From ban on triple talaq to reduction in maternal mortality to empowering women officers in combat roles and in frontline roles in the army. 10,400 women officers are there in the defense forces today, 3x more than what it was in 2014. We spoke of how corruption is decreased, there's a more transparency in the government. E-tendering process, GEM. All of these things have strengthened our war against corruption. India today is also an emerging sports power. All of you are following how the Prime Minister has personally led a culture of respecting sports persons. And all of this has led to a Sashakt Bharat. I want all of you to remember only one thing while I leave all of you with this thought on this. Friends, I don't know how many of you recollect. Maybe we were all in school. No, I was in college and maybe you guys were in school. 2014 se pehle, whenever there would be, one of the common aspects of our newspapers was, along with corruption scandals, one common feature was terror attacks. Whenever there would be a festival, whether it was Bangalore, whether it was Delhi, whether it was Guwahati, Ahmedabad, the terrorists would strike at will. And I don't know how many of you remember, about a decade ago when we would visit, say, railway stations or airports, there would be these constant announcements that would go on, that please take care of unattended belongings, please bring it to the notice of these authorities. Yaad hai aapko? There would be these announcements that would go on, that please watch out for unattended bags, please report it to authorities, because terrorists could strike at will. From 26/11 to what happened in Bombay, Amritsar, what happened in cities like Bangalore, which are relatively safe compared to, say, places like Pathankot. In the last 9 years, I want to emphasize this, underscore this, and request all of you to appreciate the magnitude of this. In the last 9 years, there is zero terror incidents outside of conflict zones in India. Zero terror incidents, zero casualties outside of terror zones in India, outside of conflict zones in India. Even Israel, with a small population, with a small geography, and a far more advanced military and intelligence system, cannot boast of this achievement. But in the last 9 years, we have zero terror casualties, zero terror incidents outside of conflict zone in India. That's the case not just with radical religious terror, but also with left-wing terror. There's a 44% reduction in terror incidents just in Jammu Kashmir. 77% reduction in left-wing extremism terror. And we spoke of the border development that has taken place. 6,800 kilometers of border roads have been built. 6,800 kilometers of border roads built for the first time. Our defense expenditure has doubled from 3.7 lakh crore, 17 lakh crore to 6.23 lakh crore. And the first time the country has also shown that to defend ourselves, the country will not hesitate to go inside the borders of the enemy, conduct surgical strikes, and neutralize the enemy camps outside of India. So this is the Sashakt Bharat that has come, and this truly has redefined India's position in the global order. We are today a respected geopolitical power. We are no more a rules taker, but we are a part of the rules making group. We are an aspirational geopolitical power which is leading multiple global alliances, whether it's the International Solar Alliance, whether it is the International Biofuel Alliance, whether it is our interventions to understand and regulate cryptocurrency, whether it is our interventions to regulate artificial intelligence, whether it's our opinion and voice at the international standard setting bodies. India today is an important rising global power. I'm sure this is something that you would have seen. In the recently concluded G20, the Prime Minister along with the Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, the head of the European Union, and President of the United States announced this India Middle East Europe corridor. Now, what does this mean for us? Two things. You remember that a few centuries ago, India's economy was one of the biggest in the world, and before our invasions, we had a share of up to 27% of the global economy. That was the size of India's economy before our invasions. And where were we making this trade? With whom were we making this trade? How were we making it? Through these very trade routes. We were a prime exporter and trade partner with Middle East, with Israel, with Middle East and with Europe. So the Hindu-Arabic numerals also travel to different parts of the world through this trade routes. Through this one step, we are not only reclaiming our earlier trade routes, but we are also reclaiming our historical ambitions to be a very, very powerful voice at the global level. And this is just an indication. We have seen how India is surpassing our own benchmarks that we set for ourselves, in whether it's intellectual property, whether it's in energy, whether it is in climate change. I would want all of you to just look at this one slide as we conclude. In 2013, the newspaper headline said that economy grows at slowest rate in a decade. Today, India is the fastest growing global economy. 2013, the industrial growth rate was at a 20-year low. Today, we are at a 30-month high in our manufacturing. Banks' NPA assets had surged 50%. Today, the bank's bad loans have fallen to a 10-year low. Rupee was amongst the worst performing currencies in the world, and today rupee remains the best performer against other global market currencies. This is something that the country has achieved over the last so many years. I would only want to leave all of you with this thought before we take a few questions, if you have any. The next 25 years are extremely important for all of us, because the next 25 years, the country is at crossroads. The next 25 years, all of us have opportunities multiplied for ourselves and for others. The impact that we can make the next 25 years is not only going to be at a domestic level, but it's going to be at a global level. Which is why the Prime Minister says, यही समय है, सही समय है, ये भारत का समय है. Thank you so much for being a very patient and a very engaging audience. Thank you so much.
सही समय है